Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I am Sam Abu Samad.
So we are up to, what is it, episode 27, and it's we got a bunch of stuff to talk about, so let's jump right in to the garage. And Sam, you go first. What are you driving?
Well, I just sent back the Jaguar XF 2.0D R Sport today. That
sounds like it. Did you shed a tear?
I did, yeah. I really like that car. I mean, it's been a while since I drove an XF. This is the first time I've driven the second generation XF. Last time I had an XF was way back in like 2010, and that was an XF-R, I think.
Yeah, which is it's a hell of an entertaining car. But
yeah.
And the new XF, like so the old XF was what? That was the basically an aluminum version of the Do 98 platform. So that was like old engineering.
They changed quite a bit.
Did they?
Going to the XF? I mean, the whole structure was redone, in aluminum. Some of the suspension architecture and stuff was largely carried over from the old S type, the Do 98, which was also shared with the last Ford Thunderbird and the Lincoln LS.
Right.
But this one is all new. It's part of the new generation of Jaguars and Land Rovers, developed under Tata ownership, and it's really well done. It's a good looking car, drives really well. And, it's interesting that, right after, Volkswagen, basically got totally killed on diesels, Jaguar Land Rover started introducing a bunch of diesels to the American market.
Yeah. Well, and so that's where I was going was like, I liked the XF because of its unruly, not necessarily unruly, but like it was a car that knew how to have fun.
Yeah.
And it still is, even with its new platform, and it always looked good, and it still does. It's a little crisper now. So they kept everything that was good about it. They made it better, and now I'm really interested in the new Ingenium or however you say it, but the 2-liter turbo diesel. That's a 180 horsepower engine. They have a gas version that's I think like 240 something horsepower. But so how is it?
It's really good. For a 2-liter, it's one of the more powerful 2-liter diesels, 2-liter 4-cylinder diesels you're going to find. 180 horsepower, 310 foot-pounds of torque.
Yeah, something big like that.
Yeah, or 318 actually. So it feels good and strong, especially when you put it in sport mode. If you drive it around in drive or eco mode, you'll get a little better fuel economy. But it's a little more sluggish off the line. And it doesn't, even in sport mode, it doesn't actually, sprint off the line. It's typical diesel, slightly laggy right off the line.
It gains speed like a stone rolling downhill.
As soon as you're moving, it goes, and it feels really strong. The transmission shifts nicely, really quick shifts, which is good. It's an 8-speed automatic, and given the limited rev band of a diesel engine, you want something that is going to feel good when it's shifting because it's going to tend to do it a lot. It's clearly, very much of an evolution, very much of an incremental update from design wise from the previous XF, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's a really nice shape. So it's surprisingly roomy inside, very comfortable. Jaguar's current, their new infotainment system is a huge step up from the last, which, is not saying a whole lot.
Yeah, well, the last was not good. Right. So this is in control touch, and you probably have like the fanciest version that has all of the apps and all that stuff too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't use any of that. Once I got my phone paired up, I just used that.
Did it work for Android Auto and all the?
There's no Android Auto or CarPlay support yet. Hopefully they will be doing that within the next year or so, but right now they don't. So, it's just standard Bluetooth streaming, but the car itself, is great to drive. One thing that I've found a little unusual, typically on diesels, where they've got a urea injection system, usually, next to the fuel filler nozzle, you'll find a second nozzle there, which is for refilling the urea tank. On the Jag, that extra filler is, instead of being next to the diesel fuel filler, is actually in the trunk, which it seems like kind of an odd place to put it. But hey, whatever, just got to be careful.
It's Jaguar. Yeah.
If you've got stuff in the trunk, just be careful when you're refilling it. Although usually, the refill, the tanks are usually sized so that your refills of the AdBlue or diesel emissions fluid, however they call it, are timed typically with the oil changes. So usually when you take it in for an oil change, they'll top up the AdBlue tank, and that's typically the way it works.
Yeah, it seems like the real difference there is how much you demand of the engine. I think if you're asking it for more performance, if you're beating the hell out of it all the time, it's going to go through that stuff more.
Yeah.
In
typical driving, it'll last you 10,000 miles between a refill, a couple of gallons of that stuff.
How weird is it though that like you just talked about putting it in sport mode? I'm just thinking like a diesel with a sport mode that just doesn't seem right. I mean, although there were diesels that ran, the Indy 500 and stuff, but still, it just seems weird.
Diesels won a whole bunch of 24 Hours of Le Mans over the past decade, with Audi colors.
That's true. That's true.
There's in modern terms, high performance diesels are not mutually exclusive. I mean, Porsche builds cars with diesel engines in them.
That's true. But I mean, Porsche has a history with diesel. They had the tractor back in like the late 40s.
Yeah. Okay. But I mean, that doesn't really count.
So many things that I say don't count. Yeah. I mean,
one thing that's particularly impressive about this thing is, despite, having pretty decent performance, it's also amazingly fuel efficient. I averaged over the course of the last week, 34 miles per gallon, and in a couple of highway drives, got, up to 42, 43. So this thing's really stingy on fuel, so you won't have to visit the gas station very often.
Yeah, what does that work out to range wise? It has like 500 or more in terms of miles per tank, or is it not quite that much?
I'm not sure. Let's see. Fuel tank capacity is 17.4 gallons, so it's got a big tank. So you're gonna get well over 500 miles on this thing.
That's a lot. That's like a week and a half of driving, even for me with my ridiculous commute. Plus all the like the weekend driving and stuff. That's just a lot.
If you're talking about a long road trip, it's a highway road trip and you're getting 40 miles per gallon, that's almost 700 miles.
Yeah,
so, I mean, you're going to have to stop to relieve yourself before you're going to need to refuel this thing.
Yeah, and that's what I found with one of my S60s had, or both of them, I think, had a 21 or 23 gallon tank, and my T5 on the highway would get close to 30 miles per gallon. And so, I think the longest I ever went on a tank was like 530 miles. And you're just like, you're like, man, this car is just, it has way more stamina than I do.
Yeah.
I got to stop. I got to get out.
The thing about diesels, I mean, I remember a few years back, when Volkswagen launched the jetted TDI, and they were doing they did some commercials, talking about it getting like 750 mile range on a tank, which is just that's nuts.
Yeah, and this car is better in every way than the old XF that we like. It's roomier, it's quiet, it handles and rides nice, like it does all the things. So I guess the idea of a Jaguar with a diesel, to some of those of us maybe with an outdated perception, like I just showed with my saying like diesels with a sport mode is weird, but just it does. The diesel thing seems to fit with Jaguar. It works within the whole sort of brand that they've cultivated.
Yeah, and especially in the sedan, I mean, all the other characteristics of this thing are just like what you would expect out of any Jaguar sedan or Cooper sports car. It's got crisp handling, decent ride quality. I mean, it's not plush, but it's comfortable. But good steering. So everything about it is exactly what you expect of a Jaguar. It's just a lot more fuel efficient. I don't think you would want this engine, say, in an F-Type, but certainly in the XE or the XF. I think it's a great combination.
Now, what was the sticker?
$62,000.
That's a deal.
Yeah,
like if it's,
I mean, you compare that to a 5 Series, or
right, we'll get to that.
an Audi A6, or a BMW or a Mercedes E-Class. I mean, that's actually a pretty good deal. And that's the other thing. About a year and a half or so ago, Jaguar decided, what they found was, they around 2011, 2012, when they started bringing out the new generation of vehicles, they started bumping up the prices to, put them more on a par with their German competitors. And, they found that, it was hurting their sales a bit. And they ended up having to discount the cars a lot, in order to get the sales that they were looking for. And so what they did was they went back basically and just repriced everything. And so,
they did. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So now they're, and they repackaged everything. So now, they're basically selling the cars without discounts at, actually
at the discount price,
a little bit higher transaction price than what they were getting before. So.
Right. But they when they did that, you said they repackaged it, and they actually added more standard equipment.
Right. And so
they pulled the prices back.
It seems like more, a better value to customers.
And then when they added service too, like scheduled maintenance and stuff. So they really want people to buy their cars.
Yeah. So, I mean, base XF starts at about $50,000 now. And, the one that I drove, had the R Sport package, which has the bigger wheels and tires and, all the options on there. And that came to about 62,000. So that's, it's not cheap, but it's a good value relative to the segment.
Well, and that's, that's a good place to pivot, because, I had the 5 Series last week. I just had it for like a couple of days. So I spent a full week with it. And that can sort of get us to our first topic for the evening. But, the 5 Series starts at 51. The 5 Series that I drove had $20,000+ worth of options on it. And it wasn't topped out. There were other things you could have added to this. So, at 62, the XF is really, really competitive. I'm sure it actually has a very pleasant level of equipment. The R Sport, that's a newer trim level, and it tends to be, pretty well equipped, just sort of like right out of the box. You just select the R Sport, and it's nice. You can add a thing or two if you want, but generally it's very competitive. So I'm sure that to comparably equip either, an E-Class or an A6 or a 5 Series is probably going to cost you more money. Yeah.
Well, and also, at that $62,000 price, that was also with all-wheel drive. So, that's...
Oh, yeah.
That's another couple of grand on there.
You're not getting extra. Yeah. So yeah, the 5 Series, and I actually, I wrote a post for Forbes, which will go up tomorrow. But it really made me scratch my head because, you think of BMW 5 Series, and really my first awareness of the BMW 5 Series was the E34 in the 90s. That was just such a driver's car. It was like the epitome of BMW, and like what you think of. The E34 and the E39 were really sort of the pinnacle. This one is just, it's not a driver's car. And so it made me think like, well, does it even matter? Do driver's cars even matter, or has the definition of a driver's car shifted?
Well, I think driver's cars do matter, but unfortunately, it's to a very small segment of the population, like us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to most consumers today, they don't care.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did some poking around, and so part of it I think is just the buyers for these cars they did their thing with the E34 and the E39, and it's like the same people. It's that 65 to 70-year-old baby boomer. They have the earning ability to purchase one of these cars, and they're kind of not interested anymore in getting their kicks that they did earlier in those cars. They're a little bit more sedate. They want something that's roomy and comfortable and high quality and is familiar. But they don't necessarily need something to just sort of give them an adrenaline rush. They just want to get there, and that's largely what the 5 Series is now. At least the 530.
I think part of the problem is that all modern cars have just gotten so good. I mean, even the most basic mainstream cars. I mean, if you look back, at the early 90s, if you remember the first generation Ford Taurus SHO, I mean, that thing blew people's minds.
It also blew transmissions.
Well, there's that too. But, I mean, that car had 220 horsepower. Went 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds. I mean, it was pretty.
It was that quick. That's quick. I thought it was.
It certainly was for that time.
It was very quick for that time, but even now, that's a quick car.
Well, yeah, but the thing is now, I mean, a basic, V6 Toyota Camry or Honda Accord does the same thing.
No, I know, and it's probably actually quick. Those are probably like in the 5s if you launch them right.
Actually, yeah,
maybe not.
I think they're actually just under 6 seconds.
That's crazy. So that's a
like in the
fast car.
5.9. Yeah, and I mean, nobody considers that special.
Yeah,
and you've got a lot of cars, especially certain brand of electric cars, or actually all of these high end electric car startups, fighting over who's the quickest 0 to 60, because they're running 2.4, 2.5, 2.3 seconds 60s.
For an electric car too, like that's such nonsense because it's really not hard to make an electric car that quick.
Right. And the thing is, who cares?
And especially with an electric car.
I don't care how golden your butt is. You're not going to be able to tell the difference on the road between a car that goes from 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds or 2.5 seconds. It's at the point where it is utterly meaningless anymore. There's a story that came out today on Tesla fan site electrek.co about the next generation Tesla Roadster, which is maybe coming out in a couple of years or not. That it's supposed to that Elon Musk is considering a target of under 2 seconds for 0 to 60. It's like, where are you ever going to use that? I mean, I know you want some quick acceleration, to do passing maneuvers and, to merge on the freeway, but how much do you really need? I mean, I am a guy whose philosophy my whole life has been, you can never have too much torque, but
that's a good philosophy. I like that.
I'm kind of starting to think, well, maybe you can. I mean, what's the point? It's not like you can use it anywhere in the real world. And in fact, if you have a Tesla, you can't even use it very often because if you use maximum acceleration more than a certain number of times, it gets recorded in the control system and it'll start dialing you back, and it won't let you have full acceleration anymore because it's trying to protect the battery and the power electronics and everything.
Well, and that's what I was like sort of thinking of with the electric car. Like, yeah, you can tear off a really quick pass once. First of all, it's stupid, just because of what are you going to do with that? Where are you going to do that? You're never going to get that quick on the street. The surface doesn't have enough traction. You don't have enough space to really do it. Like, it's just beyond that, you run the risk of damaging the batteries. Like it's just like it's abusive.
It's not even just EVs. I know I'm sounding like a cranky old man now, but I know I'm taking your spot here, but
you can have it. I will cede that territory.
Modern supercars and hypercars, like Porsche 918s and McLaren P1s. Like, you who drives these things? Ridiculously rich people drive them. And
Poorly. They usually drive them poorly.
Usually poorly. Trundling along Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, or up and down South Beach or somewhere else. At low speeds. Where what is the point of driving a car like that? So slow, other than to show off how rich you are, just to show the world how much money you have to light on fire. It's to me it's just stupid.
Okay, so thus endeth the
rant,
the political, socio-psychological,
the segment of the rant.
Yeah,
because we've got rant about tonight.
Well, I as I got to analyzing, sort of the driver's car or lack thereof that I was finding in the new 5 Series, which is like it's the G something, or it's the G11, I think. I forget the platform.
I think so, yeah.
But either way, so we touched on that it's more than driver's cars used to be. It's more size, it's more weight, it's a lot more technology. It's so much more performance. I'm sure this thing could effortlessly, even with the 2-liter engine that it's got, the 2-liter turbo engine that they use it in Minis and X1s and other stuff. That's what they use in the 530i. I'm sure it probably outperforms pretty much every E34 except for maybe the M5.
Yeah.
And
G30, by the way.
Oh, G30. Okay. And it does it effortlessly as well. Like, you just don't even know. But that's the problem. Like, there's also less to the car. There's less feedback, less, definitely no quirks. It's just pretty trouble-free.
None of the visceral excitement you would have gotten out of a car, 20 or 30 years ago.
I thought it was boring.
Yeah.
And like, it's a BMW and it was boring. And if you actually want to sort of get it up on the edge, and this is why I'm assuming this is one of the reasons why you bought a Miata, was because it's the slow car fast, right? You can get it out to the edge of its performance envelope without really putting anybody in danger. To get this car out there where it actually starts to, deliver some of that driving enjoyment, you're at extra legal speeds. You're really risking it, and with the run flat tires and the numb power steering, like you're actually like you don't know how close you're coming to the edge. And that was one of the issues I had with it was it was optioned up, starts at 50, it was optioned up to $75,000. And it had the active steering assist or whatever, that it uses variable assist and rear wheel steering. So it rotates in this really uncanny way. And it's a neat trick, when you get rear wheel steering into the mix, it makes the car feel smaller. Because it rotates around an axis that it wouldn't normally with the wheelbase the way it is. So it's a neat sensation, but you also wind up like getting either more or less than you expect. You can never really sort of dial in what it's going to do for you. At least I found with this particular car, it wasn't predictable enough, at least for the week I had it. So I really didn't like ringing it out or trying to. So I wound up just sort of, it was just a big Camry. At that point, it was like a car that I didn't want to push because I didn't know how far I could push. And so I'm sort of sad that it's like, it's less interesting, even though it's probably the best performing 5 Series ever, on paper. And
even on the road, it's just that, and this is not a knock on BMW specifically.
No, everybody does this.
Yeah, it's everything in the segment, and whether and from mainstream up through premium cars, everything has gotten so good that it's become less interesting.
Yeah, and that's so. Part of the problem is definitely me. Because I want and expect a certain thing out of a particular car. And this is one of those nameplates that just is supposedly known for it. And so I went into it with my preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to drive. Where BMW wants to sell cars. So they're making the cars the way people are buying them. And, it is a nice car. It's big. It's very comfortable. Mm-hmm. It looks great. It's high quality throughout. It's built well. It's quiet, smooth. It has that there's nothing to really complain about. All the sort of rough edges have been really burnished. But that's a complaint in and of itself, I guess, is where I'm getting at. And the real horsepower race in so many cars, and especially in this segment, it's in the dashboard. Yeah,
it's the technology.
Yeah, and I can't really knock iDrive in terms of its competitive set. It was one of the first, and it's because of that, it's now one of the best. It's really good.
It's certainly. I mean, it had its issues in the early days, but the current iteration of iDrive does work really well, and the UI has gotten so much better, and it's so much more responsive.
But I did find it distracting. Even as good as it is, it's still a trinket that you're fiddling with, instead of just driving. And the tech in this car is like, it wants to do a lot of stuff for you. And I think, again, that's what the buyers who buy these things want. But that's what drives me nuts. You can't even shut it off. Like, if I open the door and then hit the start stop button, the audio system doesn't shut off.
No, it doesn't shut off until you get out and close the door.
You have to lock the door to make it so. I'm just like, is that a feature? Like, I'm not going to walk away with the radio playing like that. That's wrong to me. Like, you're going to run down the battery. You got to make sure the car is off. And I know it is a feature, but it's. And I couldn't find the setting to actually disable that. I'm sure that there is some setting.
I think it is somewhere in the menus, but
I found that, and like the fan speed, no matter how fast I set it, it would still do its own thing.
All you do is twirl your finger in front of the center console in the air.
Oh, I shut the gesture controls off.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
Yeah, because that was another and it is neat that there's you can talk to it, you can do the gestures, or you can use the iDrive controller or the hard buttons. So they're giving you all of those different ways to interface with it, and in terms of human machine interface, that's good practice. You're giving people the way they want to control the thing. But yeah, maybe we're just not there, in terms of how much technology we're putting into the car. It was the fact that I could get weather reports from the Weather Channel and it was branded on the screen. I was like, I don't know. I'm getting crusty, getting old and cranky. But yeah, I mean, I think that really the point that I came away was with, us drivers who like driving, we're clearly a dwindling set, and people now they want to be riders, and that's where we're going with the autonomy. And this car has pretty good semi-autonomous features. I talked about it last week. The
as long as the camera can see the lane markings.
Yeah, the automated cruise is just fantastic. And it watches your ass, and that's good, because there's a lot of other ways that you get distracted. So I can see where we're headed. We're not quite there yet, and these interim cars are going to be sort of, something that we wind up dispassionate about. But the people that kind of just want the car to get them there this may actually make a rider really happy. It's a comfortable place to be. Yeah,
I think the majority of customers that buy these things, or that even consider buying a premium car today, will love the way this thing works. They'll get in and they'll drive it, and they'll be perfectly content with it. And that's all the more power to them. And that's fine for those customers. I'm just not that customer. I'd prefer. I don't know if you've noticed on recent Mazdas, when they put on the license plate frames now, they used to have "Zoom Zoom" as their tagline. Now it's "Driving Matters."
I like that.
Yeah. And I got to get one of those for my Miata.
I'm sure they'll give you one.
I'll go to the dealer and get one.
Well, so this makes me think, though, and I think it was Alex Roy who tweeted it a couple of weeks ago. There's that new Nokia phone that's the 3314 or something. And it's basically like a retro version, of a lot of people's first cell phones, or just, a non-smartphone. It kind of makes me wonder, okay, well, so what would you have to do if you wanted to make a car that's in that vein, like a simple car that's not a highly highly technological car. I mean, you could buy a platform from a manufacturer that's like closing it out. I'm sure Chrysler would give you a really good deal on the PM MK Jeeps. And then, you just buy all the pieces from suppliers and like you return to that and the assembled cars of the 20s and 30s, all the brands that were out there that, like the Jordan, right? Or the Peerless or all of these other brands that were out there making their thing from the same parts. They're buying, engines from Continental and Lycoming and stuff. But it's an interesting thought experiment that we probably should just not entertain this evening. But speaking of riders, we can get to Uber because they have, holy crap, if they've been in the news this week. I think the only thing
they've been for the last 4 months,
but especially this week. I mean, I think the only thing in the news more is the president. Yeah. What's going on with Congress. So
yeah, Uber's board got together on Sunday for a 7-hour marathon meeting to consider the report prepared by former Attorney General Eric Holder on Uber's corporate culture, and some changes were made.
They accepted everything, right? And from the 13, it was a 13-page report, and so the board actually accepted all of their
all the recommendations.
And reading through the recommendations, it seems like I'm just astonished they got this far without having that stuff in place. It's just, a lot of it seems like just sort of, corporate responsibility 101.
Yeah. Well, the thing is in Silicon Valley, especially, there's, this sort of cult. I mean, we don't usually hear about it because most of the companies, have not gotten anywhere near as influential or as big as Uber has. Uber's got 12,000 employees now, but, or maybe 11,000.
Yeah, none of them are drivers, though, right? None of them are right.
None of them are drivers. But
nod, wink, wink.
I mean, if you look around, reports of similar kinds of problems, occur especially in startups throughout Silicon Valley all the time, and even in some of the bigger companies, not to the same degree, I think, as Uber. I mean, Uber, I think, is a particularly extreme case, in part, because of their CEO Travis Kalanick and his whole persona and the way he is, who he is and the way he has run the company. But it's, this bro culture, permeates all the companies out there.
Well, some of it is the Silicon Valley thing, the move fast and break things. Like I get it. And, I'm sure the company grew really quickly and some of that was unmanaged growth where they just didn't have these things in place. And you're a group of firefighters, even though they have, so many employees, you still wind up being a group of firefighters.
You can move fast and break things without being an asshole about it.
There is that, but I don't think you can do that in Silicon Valley, not from what I have seen. Somebody give me an example. I don't have any examples of companies of people that I would like to have a chat with. They all seem like douches.
I mean, I've never heard of anything quite like this, coming from, Larry Page and Sergey Brin.
They're just not living up to their "don't be evil" thing. Google has its own. Yeah,
the company has their own issues.
Yeah,
I think I don't think there's anybody that's been quite like this. Not to this degree. At least certainly not on this scale.
That's fair.
But, so part of the changes, part of the board's decision to accept these changes, they had a big all hands meeting on, was it Monday? They announced some of the changes. They announced that Travis Kalanick is taking an indefinite leave of absence from the company.
I thought was it 3 months or is it indefinite?
Time frame.
Okay.
They just said it's an indefinite leave of absence. And even when he comes back, a lot of his responsibilities are going to be redistributed to other executives.
Yeah, that was their number one first recommendation in the report was give him less to oversee and, put in an operations officer to handle those things that he's, sort of doing poorly. And some of that is the hubris of being the founder. You want to be that hands-on person. Sometimes it's hard to delegate. So I can see how that just evolved to a point where everything rolls up to him because it always has. And you have to sometimes have a shock to the system to make that adjustment and say, like, no, here's really how we should be structured. It'll be better. Trust us. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, in this case, they didn't fire Kalanick outright. And in part, that's likely because they probably couldn't unless he wanted to go.
So I was going to say, like, do you think that they will, or do you think that he will eventually decide that he's had enough? He'll tap out?
I have a feeling it might be the latter, because, they can't fire him unless he wants to go, unless he decides he wants to go, because of the share structure they have. He's like a lot of companies out in the Valley now. They've got super voting shares, among for the shareholders, especially for these both for privately held and for public companies. For example, at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, effectively controls, even though he doesn't have, 57% of the shares, he controls 57% of the votes in the company. This is actually, it's relatively new in Silicon Valley, but it's actually not an entirely new concept. It was actually pioneered by none other than Ford. When they went public back in the 1950s. They went public and they created a dual class share structure with common share. Class A shares are the ones sold to the public, and Class B shares can only be owned by the family.
Well, that's a sneaky way to sort of raise money without having to buy all the retain that much of ownership. Right? Like, you can still maintain control, but you have more shares to sell at that point.
Right. So
because of the super
the Ford family, members of the Ford family own about 2.5% of the shares of Ford Motor Company, but they have 40% of the votes. Similar things, are now happening at a lot of Silicon Valley a lot of tech companies. When Snap went public a couple of months ago, the shares they sold to the public actually have 0 votes. But
you get to say that you've invested in Snap.
Yeah. So this is the reason why they can't fire Kalanick, because he controls too many of the votes on the board, even though he's just a single individual. And so, unless he decides that he wants to go. And my guess is that if things start to get better over the next few months while he's gone, there will be a lot of pressure on him to leave and not come back to Uber.
I mean, at a certain point, especially if you still own shares, you can just be like, you know what? I'm just going to sit back and count my money for now.
Yeah.
And, Uber is so crazily overvalued. Like, just cash out, like, before the bottom drops out of it. Because that's still an issue that I think is on the horizon at some point. And they've had, this is the Eric Holder report, but they're also, now being investigated for their handling of sensitive data. That came out today. So that's another sort of thing they're going to have to get through. And I think, though, these moves are, this is Uber's survival play. If they ever want to sort of grow and mature as a company and become, really grown-ups, they have to do this stuff, and they have to do it now. And it has the potential, and it positions them very well to, continue to be a going concern. These all seem like good moves, like looking at it from a cold perspective, or just a sort of business perspective. These are the things that me as an investor, I would be pleased with. You get rid of some of the toxic culture. There was the board member who shot his mouth off, who said that, like, women talk too much or something.
Yeah, David Bonderman. During this meeting on Monday, Ariana Huffington, who's also on the board, she commented,
whom I do not like, by the way. We'll just put that out there.
I'm not a fan of Ms. Huffington either.
She talks about how much sleep she gets. That's great. I'm surprised she can sleep at night, given how she profited from other people's work she didn't pay them for.
Yeah, exactly.
I just had to get that off my chest. Now we can move on.
Regardless, she made a comment. That data shows that once you've got one woman on the board of a company, it's a lot easier to get a second and third and fourth, which is true. But then board member David Bonderman piped up with some ridiculous comment about, what the data shows is when you get 2 women on the board, you get a lot more talking.
Yeah.
And he deservedly got a lot of criticism for that. And later in the day ended up resigning from the board because of it.
I mean, I'm all for the impolitic joke, but sometimes, and given that situation, like, man, just bite your tongue. Like, I have a history of not biting my tongue, and I can't fathom how you can be in that position at that company under these circumstances and shoot your mouth off like that. Given everything that Uber has undergone.
That's exactly the kind of thing that has allowed this toxic culture to permeate the company, to permeate Uber over the last 7 years, is because people like Bonderman allowed it to happen. They did nothing to rein in Kalanick and his worst impulses.
Yeah, I mean, and I saw somewhere too, there was maybe it was a CNN report where some of it was like they'd roll their eyes and they just say, like it's just Travis being Travis, but the company is booming and it's got
even if it is Travis being Travis, there's no excuse for anybody behaving like that anywhere in any company. And if he's if he can't show a little bit of restraint, a little bit of self-control, and behave better, then he shouldn't be running a company like that.
Oh, I agree. And I think that, with a diminished role, with a diminished role and with the changes they're making, like they're making the decisions and the moves to really ensure the long-term survival of Uber. Like I said, and I think that it's actually going to work out for them if they can stick to it, and sort of weather the storm. They're going to have to get their data policy together. I mean, and some of that is it's unexcusable ignorance. We have a client, much smaller scale, but they're dealing with personally identifiable information on web forms, and it's like, guys, you have to take care of this, and we're not taking care of it for you, and you must do it because the penalties are criminal. So you really ought to get your data policy together, like now, before we move forward with our project. And for them to not, for Uber to not have a handle on PII or just more sensitive data, or even just where employees have used the information to spy on people, that's just inexcusable, and that needs to stop, and there needs to be real controls put on that. And I have, for looking at it today, I have faith that they'll at least try. So we'll see what next week brings. Yeah.
For the sake of the 12,000 people that work there, I hope that.
Are they that big? Holy crap.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know what they all do, but
they do stuff. Yeah. They play ping pong and foosball.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, so to somewhat shift gears, we found out as well that Apple has decided that they were working on a car, and now they're just kind of working on being a supplier. They decided, like, we don't actually want to make a car.
Well, we're not exactly sure for certain what they're working on. What happened was yesterday, Tim Cook, their Apple CEO, finally acknowledged that they're working on automated driving systems, which does not necessarily mean they're working on a car.
Yeah, so I took away that they had been working on it, and they were like, that's too hard.
I suspect that they at least investigated it.
Yeah,
they
and
building complete cars and decided that wasn't worth it. But I don't see Apple being a supplier either.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about the way Apple does all their other business. They like to control everything. They do not want to be, part of the reason why, things have not worked out great with Apple CarPlay is because car makers don't want to cede that control to Apple over the dashboard and over, data from the vehicle. Apple is a company that likes to control everything about the user experience with their products. So they control the software, they control the hardware, they control the distribution. They decide what apps you can load on your iPhone or on your iPad. You can't just, randomly load any apps you want from any source. Given the nature of the way they conduct the rest of their business, why would they want to become a supplier to the auto industry? even for something like autonomous driving software.
Because they are looking at ways for their brand to survive. You're only going to sell so many more iPhones. Like that market's cooling off. Everybody who wants one tends to have one, and you can only make them obsolete, in such a cadence.
Right. How much branding do you see on your car for the suppliers that make the parts that go in there?
Well, now, correct. But, you talk about Apple, Apple CarPlay, right? Like, what if the whole infotainment system was Apple? What if it was, Apple branded automated driving and it was really good, and so you would then shop for cars that had the Apple autonomy feature.
Why would an automaker want to hand over that level of control to Apple?
Because it's a selling point for them. It gets butts and seats, right? Like, it's the halo effect. Like Hyundai has Apple autonomy in its cars. It's a draw.
My feeling is that it's actually going to be the opposite. I don't think Apple's going to be the supplier. I think Apple's going to be the OEM, and car makers, one or more car makers, are going to end up being the tier one suppliers to Apple and also to Waymo.
So Waymo's an interesting case too, because they actually built that silly little car, and then they're working on the next gen of it, and they're just partnering with FCA. Right.
Well, the little car, the little pod, which they called the Firefly, they only built about 30 of those, and they were never intended as production thing. I mean, they're little tube frame, low speed electric vehicles with fiberglass bodies, and if you've ever seen one up close, after they've spent some time driving around on the roads, they tend to have a lot of cracks in the bodywork. It was always meant as nothing more than a development platform for their software and also their sensing hardware, which they designed and developed on that vehicle. So I think the relationship that Waymo has today with Fiat Chrysler is essentially a tier one supplier to Waymo. For those that don't work in the auto industry, the tier one suppliers are the supplier. You have the manufacturer is the one whose branding goes on the vehicle. The tier one, you have various levels of suppliers. The tier ones are the ones that supply components and systems directly to the manufacturer that does the final assembly and sells the vehicle. And so in the traditional auto industry, that's companies like Bosch and Continental and Delphi and Denso, and they get a lot of parts from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, and they integrate those parts and sell. So for example, Bosch will get chips from one company and motors and other pieces from other companies. They'll integrate that into a stability control system and sell it to an automaker, and then the automaker installs it in the vehicle and sells that vehicle. In the case of Waymo and Fiat Chrysler, Waymo don't want to be a traditional supplier to the auto industry. They want to control the automated driving experience, including providing the services to customers, to consumers. And so they want to retain control of the software, the sensors, the compute platform, and all the data that's generated by their vehicles. And the only way they can do that is if they partner with OEMs that are willing to sell them a vehicle platform. In that scenario, the OEM or the automaker becomes a tier one supplier to Waymo, because they are essentially selling one giant subsystem to Waymo, which is the vehicle. And then Waymo installs their part of it on there and makes the services available to consumers. I think Apple is probably going to go down the same path. So what we'll end up seeing is something that's an Apple branded mobility service. It'll probably be a premium mobility service. It won't be a low end system like, Uber Pool or Lyftline or something like that. It'll be premium services, more likely something where you'd pay a flat monthly subscription fee and have access to vehicles whenever you need it, that sort of thing. It'll be more expensive, but you'll have a better user experience, things like that. And I think that's the scenario that they're going to take, and they will partner. They'll find a car maker that doesn't have the ability or the expertise to design and develop autonomous driving systems on their own, and that may be struggling, overall, and, have them build vehicles, to Apple's specs, and then they'll install the autonomous stuff on there and make the services available.
So it's not it's not Apple building their own cars. It's Apple providing customers to this mobility service. But what automaker doesn't have this autonomous capability, or a supplier or tier one that can give it to them?
Fiat Chrysler, Mazda, Mitsubishi.
You don't think Fiat Chrysler has a tier one that's ready to partner with them?
Well, they haven't really done a whole lot. Certainly nothing that we've seen yet, in terms of autonomous vehicle development. I'm sure they've got some experiments going on, but there's nothing notable that they've done. They have not. That's not been a primary concern of theirs up to this point, which I think is part of the reason why they decided to work with Waymo on this project with the Pacifica minivans. Because they see that as a market for them, to sell vehicles to companies like Waymo.
I mean, I guess that's fair. I'm just surprised, and I guess for Fiat Chrysler, given the rest of their product mix and sort of where they are in the market, it makes sense for them to consider partnering up with sort of the biggest brand you can find. Yeah. Again, that halo effect.
With Apple, the other option too, besides, an automaker, is it could be, a contract manufacturer like Magna, or Valmet, or there's a few other companies that do this sort of thing. It's also possible, that they could partner with a Chinese OEM, a Chinese manufacturer.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And then much like they work with Foxconn, they give them the specs, they do the design, give them the specs, and have them do all the manufacturing for them, and then get them to where they need to be. That I think that's the kind of model that they would work with. So they could pick one of the Chinese companies and use their manufacturing capabilities to build bespoke vehicles for them.
And you don't think that they're terribly worried about intellectual property theft or anything like that with dealing with the Chinese manufacturer?
No, because I think the core stuff, the autonomous software, and the sensors and things like that, and that, they will, that stuff they'll keep to themselves. Let's put it this way: it will, it won't be. It's not like they're going to be handing over source code to whoever's manufacturing it. They'll give them binaries to load on there, or they'll even do that part themselves.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that's sort of the next big frontier, right? Is which one of these tech giants, which is arguably sort of the most robust sector, most talked about sort of industry that we have, other than automotive. Automotive has been for 100 years. That's been sort of like the pinnacle. They make these very complicated things, and it sort of uses all of the trades and all of these sort of our engineering and manufacturing might and talent, and so we're eventually soon going to see these two things sort of converge: the software, or the world that came out of software, and the Valley, and hitting the old line sort of Detroit folks, and I think there's going to be a positive from it. As much as I've sort of sounded kind of negative over the last, 27 podcasts. It's going to be really fascinating to see like how they figure out how to, like that symbiotic relationship is going to be really interesting.
I did a little talk on this at a conference last month. And I also wrote an article about it. Circling back around to the discussion earlier about, do drivers' cars matter? Part of the reason why vehicles today are so good, and why drivers' cars probably don't matter as much as they used to, is because of the relationship that there's been between the auto industry and Silicon Valley for going on 40 years now. This is this is not a new relationship. Ever since the 1970s, when the auto industry started applying microprocessors to control elements on the vehicle, starting with emission controls and engine controls, and now controlling just about everything with chips and software. The reason why the industry has done as well as it has, and why we have cars today that perform to the level that they do, is because of the collaboration between Silicon Valley and the industry. The auto industry has taken, the creations from the tech industry, incorporated those into cars. And that's why they're as powerful and as clean and as efficient and handle as well. But, at the same time, they're also just not as interesting anymore.
Yeah. Well, computers aren't as interesting anymore either when you think about it.
That's true.
I mean,
yeah,
there's the thrill of building your own Altair is no longer there, right?
And an appliance is never as interesting as something that you put together or maintain on your own.
Yeah.
And computers today largely are appliances.
They're like,
unless you're running desktop Linux.
Yeah, but then you're just a weirdo. I mean, they're not even appliances. They're like a disposable commodity. They're like Dixie cups.
Yeah.
When I think about the last desktop that I built, like it became obsolete really fast, and there's no way I'm going to upgrade that. I'm just going to buy like one of the little Intel like sort of squares that's the
NUCs.
Yeah, I mean it's so tiny and it's so powerful, and there's even smaller ones. There's a computer, a full Windows computer that's like roughly the size of an iPhone 6 Plus.
I have two of those. I have one of them sitting in front of me right now that I use for some basic tasks, and I have another one that's hooked up to the TV in the living room that acts as a media server.
Yeah, it's like is it the Kangaroo or something?
Yeah, Kangaroo, $99.
Those are crazy.
And, plug in a 2 terabyte, USB drive, with a whole bunch of media files on there.
Right.
And use that as serves up media to the rest of the house.
And when it dies, you just throw it away. Like it's $100 thing. Like, and I hate saying that because first of all, it's full of like silicon and heavy metals and, copper and batteries, all of those things. But it's like, again, it's, manufacturing and tech is friggin' amazing. And it's,
it's got us to where we are in the auto industry today. I mean, it's been, at the core of my career for 27 years now.
Yeah. Seems,
speaking of which,
seems like it's been lucrative.
Yeah. Why don't we get into, some of the questions that we had come in, through Twitter and Facebook today. One of which is related to, my last comment there. Let's see.
Oh, this must have been a Facebook question.
Yeah, it was a Facebook question from Jarrett asking us, where did I work as an engineer and what vehicles I worked on, and what did you enjoy and what did you hate? So my most of my engineering career, during when I was studying engineering as a co-op student, I worked at GM of Canada in St. Catharines, and after graduation, I went to work for what was then Delco Moraine NDH at the GM Milford Proving Grounds. Working on ABS systems there. And amazingly, the day I walked in, the first assignment I was given was to work on the ABS system for the Lotus M100 Elan.
That was the front wheel drive Elan that Lotus put out lots of press releases like, no, front wheel drive is it's superior. It's so good.
If you got in and drove one of those, you would never guess it was a front wheel.
No, I want to say I've never driven one of those, and I'm sure it was great because it was Lotus. Also, didn't Kia actually buy that whole car and produce it?
Yeah, Lotus, as it turned out, that project, just as we were on the verge of going to production in 1991 with that ABS system on that car, Lotus was losing so much money on every one of those that they built, decided to just cancel the whole program, and they stopped production of the Elan. And then 2 years later, they sold all the tooling to Kia, and they shipped it all to South Korea, and they built them there. They made some minor tweaks to the bodywork and replaced the Isuzu engine with a Kia engine, and sold those mostly in Korea for about another 4 or 5 years. And so there's these odd Korean-built Lotus Elans, that are running around, and they pop up every once in a while, but not very often.
Yeah, I think they use like an Isuzu engine or something. I don't know. Anyway,
well, the Lotus ones had an Isuzu engine,
right?
GM owned Lotus and Isuzu at the time, or had a majority stake in Isuzu at the time. And so from there, I went to Kelsey Hayes, and then over the following 16 years, through a couple of mergers and acquisitions. By the time I left, it was TRW Automotive, and I worked on slip control and electro-hydraulic brake systems and other cool stuff there. before I left in 2007.
So
that was my engineering career.
So 2007, was that when you joined Autoblog, or did you join Autoblog before you left?
There was a slight overlap there. I started doing some part-time stuff for Autoblog in late 2006. And then in 2007, I got an opportunity to write full-time with another publication that is now defunct called Green Fuels Forecast. And so I went there and did that and Autoblog for the next 3 years.
See, I think we all joined up on Autoblog around the same time, like Alex Nunez, Chris Shunk, me. We were all 2006, maybe late 2005.
Yeah, we had a whole bunch of new people that came in right around that time. I think Alex joined in early 2006.
Yeah.
Damon was there.
I was late 2006. I was like November. So yeah, it's
I think I started in September.
Yeah. See, we're all and none of us work there anymore.
Yeah, I think the one of the last people that was there when I was there is Jeremy Korzeniewski.
And he's
one of the last remaining.
Still there? Yeah, I can't remember. Like Motor One snagged so many of them because NAF. And
he's still there. Yeah, Sebastian Blanco, who was my editor on Autoblog Green, went to Motor One earlier this year, and most of the rest of the crew left over the course of the past year and a half.
I mean, it's not bad blood. It's just sort of turnover in the industry. You know, and like even now too, Mike Austin, who did yeoman's work over the last couple of years, sort of changing the character and tone and everything for Autoblog. He left, and I saw that you invited him on the podcast. So hopefully we can get him soon. Not that he wasn't invited before, but
yeah, we'll get him on here pretty soon. I hope. He lives not far from me here, so hopefully we can get something lined up in the next few weeks when he's ready to talk about what he's doing next.
Good. So what was your favorite car that you worked on? I'm sure it wasn't that Lotus, as good as it was.
Actually, it was another Lotus. During that same year and a half I was there at Delco, I had the opportunity, in addition to the Elan, to work on the ABS. We did some modifications to the ABS for the Lotus Esprit race program that was going on at that time in the Pirelli World Challenge. So the Lotus Esprit X180Rs that were running with drivers such as a certain P.L. Newman, Doc Bundy, and Bobby Carradine were all racing those cars. And, you know, at first they weren't happy with the performance of the ABS. So the team sent one of the previous year's cars up to Milford, and myself and Arnie Speaker, one of my colleagues there, but 2-3 nights a week after hours, we would take that out to Black Lake at Milford and set up an autocross course out there and spend a few hours tweaking the software.
That's
changes.
Sounds like it sucked.
Yeah, it was terrible, but somebody had to do it. And then, you know, we got to go to a few races supporting the team, you know, with updated software. So
that's really cool. So now the flip side is, what did you hate? I'm going to guess it was like the Beretta.
No, I never worked on
that. Was too late, too early for you. Okay.
Well, probably one of the worst vehicles. Well, it was there. They were working on it at the time. It's just, it wasn't something that I worked on. Probably one of the most bizarre vehicles I drove. GM was looking at, you remember the Dustbuster minivans?
Oh yeah.
Pontiac Transport.
Yeah. The GM10s.
They were going to ship those to Europe and sell them as Opals. And, you know, over here, they were only available with a V6 engine and an automatic transmission. But that was obviously a non-starter for the European market. So they had a mule that was set up with the quad four-cylinder engine. You remember that terrible?
It was very powerful. It was also like sort of, I can't even, it vibrated a lot. It was powerful, but unrefined.
Yeah.
That engine was actually amazing. It made 180 horsepower in like
it was
1988.
It was very, very powerful for its time.
It was basically an Offenhauser head design. Yeah. It was GM, but it was like, if you looked at the Offie 4, it's pretty much a quad 4. From their design.
So,
anyway,
quad 4 with a 5-speed manual in a Dustbuster minivan.
That doesn't sound horrible though. Like, it sounds entertaining. I mean, it's horrible in a good way.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think probably the most horrible vehicle though is probably the Isuzu Rodeo.
The Rodeo?
Those things were so utterly unstable. I mean, those trucks never should have been sold to the public.
Did you ever roll one?
I came very, very close to rolling one time when I was doing some testing, doing some split mu testing. But I think over the course of a couple of years, I think between my various colleagues, I think we rolled about 6 or 7.
Jesus. So, and the split mu is like, that's where you have half of half of the wheels, one side is on dry pavement.
One side on dry pavement, one side on,
slick pavement.
Something slick, either wet tiles or ice. And I came very, very close to rolling one. And like I said, several of my colleagues did roll them at various times over the course of a couple of years. In fact, I'll post one of the pictures with this post tomorrow.
That sounds exciting.
Picture of an upside down rodeo from northern Sweden in 1993.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised you didn't like the GM10s. I'm not. I'm being sarcastic, but I heard that they had mules with small blocks in them for a very long time before they actually decided to.
There were a few Lumina Coupe mules with small block V8s in them,
and I'm sure they were fantastic, and they should have sold them because the Lumina otherwise was not good.
I never had the opportunity to drive one or even ride in one, but they were.
I mean, for the day, because the Lumina had what, the 3.4.
The word torque steer.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Because I'm trying to think, like they had the 3.4. I don't know if you could get the 3800 in the Lumina. Probably eventually.
Yeah, that didn't come till late.
But yeah, so so it was the GM10, and then it became the W platform. And the W platform lasted. I mean, we just saw the last gasps not too long ago, but they eventually did put a V8 in it.
Yeah, it did eventually get it.
It took a long time. The last Bonneville, and
in 1990-91, they were evaluating the V8 as a potential replacement for the 3.4 liter twin cam.
Oh yeah, the twin dual cam. Yes.
Yeah. Because that engine was so expensive and so complex to build, and nobody thought very highly of it. So they figured, well, we can get as much power out of the V8, and it'll be a lot cheaper. And it was actually a smaller package because the way the cylinder heads and cam carriers were designed on the V6, the thing was actually pretty huge.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, nostalgia. I never worked on any cars like that. I didn't do anything interesting with my life. I went to film school. So you have all the best stories.
Oh, sorry. There's one more that I got to tell you about. When I did go to Kelsey Hayes, the first winter I was working there, we were working on what the early stages of the Ford minivan program, which eventually became the Windstar.
Those were crappy vans.
Yeah, well, when I first arrived up in International Falls in like November of 91 or early December of 91, when I first went to work there, I walked out of the airport in International Falls because we did some of our testing on the taxiway there. We used the taxiway for dry pavement testing, and then we did our ice and snow testing out on a frozen lake. And I walked out of the airport building where the garage was, and I saw this white Dodge Caravan, and I'm looking at it, and something didn't seem quite right about it, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I got up close to it. And I realized that what they had done was they built 6 of these mules that they had taken Caravan body shells, and they sent them over to Roush Engineering to build these things. And because they wanted to put the Ford 3.8 liter V6 in there. At the time, Chrysler was using the Mitsubishi 3 liter V6, which was a 60-degree engine. The Ford 3.8 was significantly wider because it was a 90-degree V6. So what they did was they spliced in like 6 inches in the front, and like right behind the wheel arch. So the nose was like 6 inches longer than a standard Chrysler minivan. And when you got up close, these things were white. When you got up close, you could see the seam where they spot welded it all together. And it was really strange looking. and then at the back, it had a Ford rear axle on there So the track was different from from the standard Chrysler minivans. So the whole thing just looked a little peculiar. And then when you get inside, for some reason they decided they put the then current Taurus dashboard in it, and because of where the steering column came through the firewall on the Chrysler body shell, it didn't line up with the instrument cluster on the Taurus instrument panel. So the steering wheel was offset about 4 inches to one side, so it blocked half of the speedometer.
That sounds so terrible.
Yeah, I could go on about some other things, but let's move on to the Hyundai Kona, which was revealed today in Korea, or maybe it was yesterday.
I think it was yesterday, but either way. So reaction was split on this. It's some people like it. I saw a lot more people who didn't like it and who immediately compared it to the Jeep Cherokee because it sort of picks up some of the cues. It has the high mounted indicator lamps and lower headlights. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's distinctive. It shares the platform with the Kia Niro, right?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I think it's actually based on the Elantra platform.
Okay.
Or maybe actually it might even be a smaller one than that. I don't think it's based on the Niro platform.
Well, either way, I think it's neat. I'm glad that they're doing something with some personality. We just got done bitching that nothing has personality anymore. So, it may look a little weird. The Cherokee looked a little weird to me when I first saw it too, but we've all kind of normalized to that now.
Yeah, and it will be coming to the U.S. In 2018. Back when the current Tucson was launched a couple of years ago, I asked then Hyundai America CEO Dave Zukowski if they were going to do a B segment crossover, since they were really starting to take off at that point. And he did say, yeah, but it's not coming for a couple of years. So it's coming in 2018. And it'll be available here probably with the 1.4 liter turbo that is in the like the Elantra Eco and some of the other current small Hyundai and Kia cars.
Yeah, and so they're saying actually it's an all new small SUV platform. So we'll probably see it under other things, or it may be sort of. I'm
sure there will be a Kia variant of this as well, with different styling.
It may also be that sort of like press release hyperbole where you say it's an all new platform when it's really like basically the same platform. They just play with the wheelbase.
There's probably some shared componentry, with other vehicles, and a lot of new stuff as well. So like the floor pan is probably new, but there's probably a lot of shared suspension architecture and things like that.
Yeah, and honestly, like look at this car as sort of a harbinger for other Hyundais to come. It's going to sort of set a stylistic direction, maybe not quite as bold for other Kias, but they're good. I mean, Hyundais, but they're going to pick up some of these stylistic elements because you have to remember that Hyundai has a very capable design director, and if you look across their lineup, they're very good at giving that family look to all the cars, and so. Expect that if this one car comes out with it, it's probably going to wind up sort of infused in the other vehicles across the lineup.
And the Hyundai family look is evolving too. I mean, for besides the Kona, the look that you see on the upcoming Elantra Sport, the hatchback version of the Elantra that's launching later this summer. It's a more aggressive, bolder look than the current generation of Hyundais.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, and it's this is where all the heat is in the market anyway. Compact crossovers. Where it's going to compete with stuff like the Toyota CHR, which is terrible. The Honda HR-V, the Fiat 500X maybe, which seems a little bigger, but what do I know? So, yeah, I mean, good for them. They're bringing something with some personality to market. I like personality.
Personality.
My own more than anybody. Sorry. So we got some questions on Twitter as well. Unless there's more Facebook.
There was more from Facebook as well. Let's see. Chuck Goolsby had a long rant about.
We should talk to Chuck. Chuck, I think, worked in the data center at Facebook. I bet he has some stories.
I know he worked at Rackspace.
Maybe it was Rackspace. Anyway.
Not sure about. Yeah, I'm not sure about Facebook.
I bet he's freaked out now that he knows what we know about him. I know that his dad had an E-Type.
Well, he's acknowledged that online, so I don't think there's anything to be freaked out about.
Just so you know, Chuck, we creep.
Hey, we just read what
That's
you
right.
post, you know. You don't want people to know about it, don't post about it. So he had a post ranting about autonomous vehicles. I'll just read the beginning of it here. If there's any justice in the world, or at least delicious irony, the first human being killed by an autonomous vehicle will be a Silicon Valley software engineer riding a $27,000 carbon fiber bicycle on Page Mill Road. I think. Which is in Silicon Valley, near Sand Hill Road, where all the VCs hang out. The uncanny valley between adaptive cruise control and full autonomy is going to be filled with dead and injured people, tort lawyers, and billions of dollars in liability claims. It'll kill this idea of autonomous vehicles as dead as the flying car, and nobody will be more shocked than the Silicon Valley software engineers, all because they honestly believe that coding away their miserable commute on the 101 is as easy as building systems to share cat videos. Nobody ever died from a cat video.
You know, he makes a good point. And I think that being a fan of the sort of elegant solution, you don't need to build an internet-connected self-driving car to solve this problem. Just work from home, for Christ's sake, for a lot of this stuff. I mean, Apple they just opened their giant spaceship building, which uses how much energy and has how many parking spaces, where they could have just had people work from home.
Well, granted, you know, it's all the place is also covered with solar cells, and you know, which pretty much self.
Yeah, I mean, solar cells, which are full of what and cost how much in resources and energy to make.
Yeah. Well,
I'm just being a jerk now.
But you know, to a degree, I agree with Chuck. But I think his opinion is maybe a little bit over.
I think Chuck needs to.
I mean, there are going to be some fatalities and some lawsuits, and you know that's probably going to help to make the technology better, because I think we do need to move in this direction. You know, I think a lot of the people in Silicon Valley are probably in for a very rude awakening over the next few years, thinking that this stuff is going to be a lot easier than it will be. I think the incumbent auto industry has a much clearer vision of how tough this is actually going to be. And, they're working very aggressively, but I think that they're also, they've been burned enough times that hopefully they will know what not to do and, not jump up prematurely with too much of this.
Yeah. I mean, we're already seeing that happen. And, in terms of the lawyer comment, like, yes, everybody loves to hate lawyers. And this is one of the lines that, because I do a lot of work with lawyers, nobody wants a lawyer until they need one, and then, from the interview with Ralph Nader that I did about unsafe at any speed too, there's always two sides to that. And like, we have stuff that doesn't kill us because, people were harmed and injured and killed because of, nobody actually considered safety, or it was wanton disregard and sort of dereliction of duty. They knew it was unsafe and they made it anyway. Or they brakes had asbestos in them for years,
and they've done stuff like that. Even relatively recently. The whole both the Takata airbag situation, and also the big GM ignition switch recall. At least at GM, that actually did make a difference. In terms of how they were rolling out Super Cruise. And, we talked about that a few episodes back, and you can go back and listen to that. I'm not going to rehash that whole thing, but it has made an impact at GM, and hopefully it will at these other companies as well. I think it will. I think, I talk to a lot of these companies, as part of my day job now as an analyst, with Navigant Research, looking at mobility and autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. And they, the car makers at least, and the traditional suppliers seem very much aware of the potential safety risks, and they are trying to mitigate those to the degree that they can.
Yeah. So they're funny jokes, but they do help you out. Your baby doesn't get his head stuck in the bars of the crib anymore because they've figured things out. Somebody had to get hurt for that to happen. So think of that.
So we also had a couple of comments from Jonathan Brown asking about the Tesla Model 3. Will performance variants challenge street cred of BMW M3? Are you personally disappointed that Musk stated no press vehicles for testing?
No.
We're always disappointed. I think we're always somewhat disappointed when car companies, don't put out press vehicles, but then
Tesla has never put out press vehicles though, really.
Yeah, they've never had traditional press fleets. Basically, you have to kind of go and beg on hands and knees to get a press vehicle out of them, or just ask really nice. And sometimes if they're not too pissed at you about something that you wrote somewhere, then they might loan you one for a few days. And then as far as the performance variants, there will probably be performance variants of the Tesla Model 3 that are quicker than an M3. But I think they will also have less character. Even though an M3 doesn't have as much character today as it did 20 years ago, I think the M3 or the Model 3 will probably be even less. And I think driving enthusiasts will, based on what we've seen of the interior of the Model 3, they probably won't be thrilled with it.
Well, I think what you're going to find is that the Model 3 is a more extreme example of that dichotomy between sort of price and premium, like price and premium outfitting. The Tesla, like the Model S, right? It has cultivated this very sort of premium image. The design is very nice. And
that's part of the reason why we're also not going to see performance variants or longer range variants of the Model 3 for a while yet, even after they launch, because they want to maintain that gap to the Model S, because they over the last several months, Elon's been making comments about the Model 3 is not just a new generation of the S, it's a more of a mainstream car. And they still want to sell S's because they know they're going to have much higher margins on those than they will on the Model 3.
Yeah.
Even though they still lose money on them, they need those for the revenue. They need to get the revenue from those.
Well, and if you make it, too much of a performance car, you're going to limit range, and range is going to be a big issue with the Model 3, just given sort of where it's going to be priced. And, that's going to be more important. You're going to want to put more batteries into that thing than you are, any other sort of concern. Because that's the most expensive part of it, and that's also the most crucial part of it, because you're getting that price down to a point now where buyers who aren't early adopters and who aren't willing to deal with sort of the ups and downs of owning an electric vehicle and being sort of the tip of the spear, you're going to get people who just expect these things to work, and it better,
Yeah. But we'll talk more about that another time. And then Jonathan also asked about timetable estimate on a mid-engine C8 Corvette for normal people who want to spend less than $100.
Oh, who cares? The mid-engine Corvette's been coming since 1967.
Yeah, and if and when it does arrive, I don't think there will be one for less than $100,000. My guess is, from conversations I've had with some of my colleagues around here, that we may end up with two distinct Corvettes, a low volume, high priced mid-engine car to take on the.
So you think they'll call that like the Zora or something? That's the rumor, right? Like it's going to be.
Yeah, Zora or something like that. That's that's what we're hearing. And then the Stingray will be the front end. Will continue the front engine tradition. That'll be the mainstream Corvette. In the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 range. As for more track worthy than today's C7 Z06, actually, it almost certainly will be more track worthy. The Z06 actually has some issues with running on the track with overheating after about 15 minutes. And in fact, I just saw something today about a lawsuit from Z06 owners against GM because they don't hold up very well in track rate and track use.
Speaking of lawyers.
Yeah. So why don't you hit bring up the
All right. So
Twitter
on
questions.
Twitter, the first question we got was from Corey. He says an associate took a 2017 4Runner out for a test drive and said it was underpowered. And he says he found the same in the Tacoma. Is Toyota behind on engine development?
I wouldn't necessarily say behind. I think most of their engines are pretty good, and in many respects, are very good. But the Tacoma and the 4Runner, are fairly hefty, and probably that V6, that they used in there is somewhat underpowered, and it's not the best choice for that truck.
So the Tacoma got. For years, they were using a 4-liter version of the V6 in both. Last year, or when they refreshed the Tacoma and sort of redesigned it.
I think it was for 16.
It got the 3.5 liter with a little bit more power and more flexibility under the power peak. It has a wider window of cam timing variability, so it can actually run as a partial Atkinson cycle and pick up some efficiency, and also it can advance the cams a little more for low end torque and stuff. So the 3.5 feels better in the Tacoma than the old 4-liter did, but the 4Runner is stuck with that old 4-liter that just feels it does feel underpowered.
Yeah. In general, I think Toyota's powertrains are as good as anyone's.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
That's those two trucks, I think, are the exception to the rule.
Yeah, and it's not that they're really behind the curve or anything. It's just the engines are what they are, and nobody's really complaining. They sell every Tacoma they can make, really. It's they don't market it as a sport truck or anything like that. It's not marketed as a high performance truck. So it does the job that it needs to do. The engine's definitely those two, or the 4-liter for the most part. It hasn't been updated in a while, but it's not terrible. But you're gonna find the Colorado and Canyon feel a little more sprightly, even though horsepower numbers are roughly on par.
But when the next generation Tacoma and 4Runner arrive, and probably in the next few years, don't be surprised to see a variation of the new twin turbo V6 that's in the new Lexus LS 500 making an appearance in some of the Toyota branded trucks as well.
I guarantee you,
I was gonna say,
I guarantee you that's going to be in the Tundra to compete with the EcoBoost Fords.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they go actually down to a turbocharged 4-cylinder in the Tacoma. Now that that's turbocharging is just becoming embraced everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, Toyota. I think it's kind of maybe overstating it to say they're behind the curve, in their engine design. I think they just had different priorities, and they were doing some different things. They were focusing on basic, thermodynamic efficiency. And, they certainly, all their engines have variable valve timing and lift and things like that. And, a lot of their engines have dual fuel injections with port and direct injection. So, I think it's overstating it to say they're behind, but they just decided to go a different direction. But they are now starting to roll out more, direct injected turbo engines as well, both in Lexus and starting to come down into the Toyota brand as well.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on Toyota, or in the meantime, just buy something else. If you feel they're underpowered, you get a Jeep. So our pal Bichio Mocha, or however you say his name. Anyway, he says his question is on the Civic Type R. Any thoughts on the first drives? Since we weren't invited on those first, I didn't make too much noise to get on it, but the wing is dumb. Other than that, I think the car's, I don't know.
From reading a couple of the reviews, it sounds like it's really good. The powertrain, is excellent as always, from a Honda, or almost always. the one thing that Honda decided to do with the Type R, where they didn't follow the rest of the crowd this time on this generation, is they stuck with front wheel drive rather than going all wheel drive like the Focus RS and the Golf R and the Subaru S.
But I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing.
No, well, not necessarily, and if you execute it right, especially at the power point they've got, it's like 307 horsepower, which is not quite as much as the as the Ford and the VW. So what they've done is they've put they've changed up the front suspension, so it's not the standard McPherson strut layout in the front, but it's a setup similar to what's been done by other manufacturers in recent years on higher performance front wheel drive cars, like the previous generation Focus RS, and GM's done it on some of their vehicles, where the geometry of the strut setup separates the steering axis from some of the other motions and helps to mitigate torque.
Oh, is it like the hyperstrut where it creates a different virtual steering axis?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So I'll drop in a link to an article I wrote way back when on Autoblog about the hyperstrut when GM launched it, and that can explain it a little better. And it's pretty similar layout to that.
Well, so and GM they were the first to market with it, but they didn't develop it. That was a supplier that developed the hyperstrut, I believe. In conjunction with GM, maybe I don't know. I
don't know. I think it was done in,
so?
But GM wasn't actually first to market with something like that. With us, I mean, all of these have slight variations in their execution, but the basic concept of separating the steering axis from other motions in the wheel are comparable to, or have been done in a variety of ways by other manufacturers. Like Audi has done it with a multi-link.
With like end. 8 ball joints per side. It works. Yeah. It does.
But I mean, the premise is the same, though, which is to minimize the impact of the torque on the steering motion.
Well, and it is like, I mean, that's the basic geometry of steering systems is like you have your actual axis that creates the virtual axis because of, it's fascinating if you want to look at it.
Yeah.
But, and like I'm not concerned really that it's a 300 horsepower car with front wheel drive, as long as it has been sort of tuned properly. I don't see that as a problem. I actually see that as a plus. It doesn't have extra weight to carry around. So, in terms of.
Yeah. I mean, adding all wheel drive, adds another 150 pounds to the thing. So, it's going to be a lighter, more nimble machine. It should, from what I've seen so far, it works very well. Hopefully sometime this summer, I'll get a chance to drive it, and I'll let you know.
And Honda does know a thing or two about how to get a front wheel drive car out of a corner. The 90, I want to say like 96, 97 Prelude. They introduced, it's basically a torque vectoring differential. It was ATTS, I think. It would transfer the power to across the front differential, so the inside wheel wouldn't spin. I forget. And it was like, it would operate with like a thump. It was like a locking differential, basically. It would give you this little thump.
It was a very ingenious mechanical system that worked quite well. They ended up coming up with other solutions to do it better, but they've often, that's one of the things that Honda has done throughout its history, is come up with very ingenious alternative ways to do things that other car makers don't necessarily.
Well, I mean, and even with just you can do that now with the anti-lock braking hardware. Is you just use the brakes to slow down that one wheel, and it'll, with an open differential, it'll transfer across to the inside.
And that's what most of the torque vectoring systems that you see on cars today are. That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. So I have no doubt that the thing's gonna be tremendous fun to drive. It kind of looks a little ridiculous, but I mean, in that class of vehicle, It seems to fit. Hey, everybody has their own taste, right? If you want conservative, get a GTI or a Golf R. I'm sorry, Golf R, which also has its own little bit of ridiculous looking to it. So, anyway, I think we are done. That is all the questions that I got on Twitter.
Yeah, just before we quit, just want to give a shout out to a few of our listeners that have let me know about that they listened to the show recently. Jim Lau from Race Logic. So for anybody that's ever used a VBox for doing data recording in their,
I want to use a VBox for data recording.
Yeah, well, if you've got specific projects you want to work on, let me know, and I'll hook you up with Jim. He said he's willing to help us out if we've got some projects we want to do. So I will. I'll connect you with him, and let's see who else. Robin Warner.
Oh yeah.
Ex of Hyundai. He's now at Auto Week, and. Let's see who else.
That's the wrong way to go in the industry. You want to go from the publication to the automaker, not the other way around. I'm just saying.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for in life.
I guess if you're looking for like being able to make the mortgage payment, it's generally better to go from the publication to the automaker.
That is usually the case. But from what I've heard, Crane Communications treats their employees pretty well. So Robin seems to be pretty happy these days. Seems to be more content than most ex-journalists I've known over the last half dozen years have been after their move over to the PR side.
Good. All right. Well, excellent. Thank you for listening.
And thanks to everybody else for listening. And if you like the show, go ahead and give it a rating somewhere, wherever it is that you get it from that has ratings, whether that's iTunes or whatever. Share it with all your friends, post it on social media. Send us your emails with your comments and questions, and we'll try to get to them. We got through a bunch of them today. And hopefully we'll have some more for next week.
All right. Thanks for listening.
All right. Bye.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.